Captain Lee Daeho stood on the bridge of the UNS Incheon and watched the colony burn. Proxima Station was dying, and there was nothing he could do about it. The enemy ships had appeared 3 months ago, without warning, without communication, without mercy. They called themselves the Vral Collective, and they thought humans would be easy to conquer. They were wrong. "Captain, we have survivors on the station," his communications officer said. "They're requesting immediate evacuation." Daeho looked at the tactical display. 5 Vral warships circled the station like sharks. His ship, the Incheon, was alone. Command had ordered him to observe and report, not to engage. They wanted to understand the enemy first, but Daeho had never been good at following orders he disagreed with. "Take us in," he said. The bridge crew turned to look at him. They knew what this meant. The Vral ships were larger, more advanced, and there were 5 of them. The Incheon would probably not survive this fight. "You heard me," Daeho said quietly. "Take us in." On Proxima Station, Private Han Suji pressed herself against the wall as another explosion shook the corridor. She had been a soldier for exactly 8 months. She had never fired her weapon at another living being until today. Now, she had lost count of how many Vral she had killed. The Vral were tall, gray-skinned creatures with 4 arms and faces that looked almost insect-like. They moved fast and fought with weapons that burned through metal like paper. But Suji had learned something important in the last 3 hours. They could die. They bled, and they could feel fear. "Suji, we need to move." Her squad leader, Corporal Jang, grabbed her arm. "The Incheon is coming for us. But we need to reach the docking bay." They ran through smoke-filled corridors, stepping over bodies of friends and enemies. Suji tried not to look at their faces. She tried not to think about the fact that this morning she had been eating breakfast with most of these people. A Vral soldier appeared at the end of the corridor. It raised its weapon. Jang pushed Suji aside and fired first. The Vral went down, but not before its shot hit Jang in the chest. Suji caught him as he fell. "No. No. No," she whispered. "Go," Jang said, blood on his lips. "Just go." Suji wanted to stay, wanted to help him, but Jang pushed her away with his last strength. "Go!" he shouted. She ran. Dr. Kang Mireille examined the captured Vral soldier through the safety glass. The creature was strapped to a medical table in the ship's holding cell. It had been wounded in the battle and taken prisoner when the Incheon had managed to rescue the survivors from Proxima Station. The cost had been high. The Incheon had lost 30% of its crew. 2 of the 5 Vral ships had been destroyed, but only because Captain Daeho had done something the Vral had not expected. He had rammed one of their ships at full speed, ejecting the crew moments before impact, then used the explosion to position the Incheon for a killing shot on another. It was insane. It was brilliant. And it had worked. Now, Mireille was trying to understand these creatures that had brought war to humanity's doorstep. "Can you understand me?" she asked, in the trade language that the Vral had used in their only communication before the war started. The Vral's large black eyes focused on her. "You should have died," it said. Its voice came through the translator as a harsh whisper. "Your ship should have died. You had no chance." "But we didn't die," Mireille said. "You are insane," the Vral said. "Your captain destroyed his own ship, killed his own crew. For what? For a few survivors? We got more than a few out," Mireille said. "We saved 300 people, at the cost of 200 of your own," the Vral said. "This is not logical. This is not how war is fought." Mireille leaned closer to the glass. "Then maybe you shouldn't have started a war with us." The Vral was silent for a long moment. Then it said something that made Mireille's blood run cold. "We studied your species for 2 years before we attacked. We watched your entertainment, your news, your history. We thought we understood you. We thought you valued individual life above all else. We thought you would surrender quickly, to save yourselves." "You were wrong," Mireille said. "Yes." The Vral agreed. "We were very wrong. You do value individual life. That is why you are so dangerous. You know exactly what you are sacrificing, and you do it anyway. Later, Captain Deho stood in the ship's memorial bay. The names of the dead scrolled on the wall in front of him. 207 names. 207 people who would never go home. Private Han Suji found him there. She had cleaned up, put on a fresh uniform, but her eyes still held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much death in too short a time. "Captain," she said. "Permission to speak freely?" "Granted," Deho said. "Was it worth it?" Suji asked. 200 dead to save 300. Was it worth it? Deho looked at the names on the wall. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I made the call I thought was right. I'd make it again. But I don't know if that makes it worth it." "Corporal Zhang died getting me to the docking bay," Suji said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "He died so I could live. I keep thinking about that. What makes my life worth his?" "Nothing," Deho said. "And everything. He made a choice. We all made choices today. That's what makes us human. The Vral don't understand that," Suji said. "No," Deho agreed. "They don't. And that's going to be their biggest mistake in this war." He was right. The Battle of Proxima Station became the first major human victory in the war. It was studied, analyzed, and copied. Humanity had learned something important. They could win, not through superior technology or numbers, but through something the Vral had never encountered before. Humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything for a chance at victory. The war had only just begun, and already both sides were learning to fear what that might mean. Admiral Park Junho reviewed the battle reports for the third time and felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. 6 months into the war, humanity was holding its ground. The Vral had not advanced further into human territory, but the reports showed something that troubled him deeply. Humanity was changing. "Admiral, the new squadron is ready for inspection," his aide said. Junho nodded and made his way to the hangar bay. Lieutenant Yun Sira stood at attention with her fighter wing behind her. They were the Ghost Squadron, named for their tactics. Fast strikes, impossible angles, and a willingness to take risks that made even veteran pilots nervous. "Lieutenant Yun," Junho said, "I've been reading about your new attack pattern. The one you used at the Battle of Titan's Gate." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. Her face was calm, professional. "We call it the Falling Star Maneuver. You dive directly at the enemy capital ship, weapons cold, until you're within 50 meters, Junho said. Then you fire everything and eject. Your fighter crashes into their hull, while you're picked up by the recovery team." "That's correct, sir," Sira said. "We've achieved an 87% survival rate for pilots, and a 100% kill rate on targets." Junho studied her face. She was 24 years old. Before the war, she had been training to be a commercial pilot. Now, she was describing a suicide attack as casually as someone might describe a training exercise. 87% survival rate means 13% of your pilots die, Junho said. "Yes, sir," Sarah said. Her expression did not change. "That's 13% versus the 40% casualty rate for conventional attack runs. We consider it an acceptable trade." Acceptable. That word bothered Junho more than he wanted to admit. Corporal Choi Hyun moved through the Vral supply depot like a ghost. He had been behind enemy lines for 3 weeks now. His mission was simple. Observe. Learn. Report. Do not engage. But Hyun had learned something during his time watching the Vral. He had learned to think like them, to predict their movements, to understand their logic. And the more he understood them, the easier it became to kill them. He was not supposed to engage. But he had eliminated 6 Vral sentries in the last week. It was necessary, he told himself. They would have discovered him. He had no choice. Hyun knew he was lying to himself. The truth was darker. The truth was that killing had become easy. Natural. He moved through the depot, his hands steady, his breathing calm. He planted the tracking devices on the supply crates as ordered. But he also memorized the patrol patterns, the weak points in their defenses, the best places to strike if he needed to. When he finally made it back to human lines, his debrief lasted 4 hours. Intelligence officers listened to every detail, took notes, asked questions. At the end, the senior officer looked at him with an expression Hyun could not quite read. "Corporal, how many Vral did you kill during this mission?" the officer asked. 6, sir, Hyun said. "All necessary eliminations to maintain cover." "Your orders were to observe only," the officer said. "Yes, sir," Hyun said. "But circumstances required adaptation." The officer was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Good work, Corporal. You're being promoted and assigned to the new Deep Strike Unit. We need more soldiers who can think like the enemy." Later, Hyun sat alone in his quarters and looked at his hands. They did not shake. He felt no guilt, no horror at what he had done. He felt nothing at all. That was what scared him most. Admiral Junho attended the intelligence briefing 3 days later. The room was filled with senior officers and analysts. The main screen showed intercepted Vral communications. "What are we looking at?" Junho asked. "These are communications between Vral fleet commanders," the intelligence officer said. "They've started using a new term to describe human forces. The translation is difficult, but the closest we can get is the dead-eyed ones." "Explain," Junho said. "The Vral are deeply emotional beings, sir," the officer said. "They value what we might call spiritual connection. They fight with passion, with purpose. But they've noticed that human soldiers don't fight that way anymore." The officer played a recording. A Vral voice spoke through the translator. "The humans do not rage. They do not fear. They attack with cold calculation, like machines. When you look into their eyes, there is nothing there. Only death. They are the dead-eyed ones. And I do not know how to fight something that feels nothing." The room was silent. Junho felt the weight of those words settle over everyone present. "Is this accurate?" someone asked. "Are our soldiers really becoming like this?" "Yes," another voice said. Dr. An Ji-won, the fleet psychologist, stood up. "I've been tracking psychological evaluations across all combat units. We're seeing a massive increase in what we call emotional flattening. Soldiers are suppressing normal emotional responses to survive the stress of combat. It's a defense mechanism. But they're still functional?" an officer asked. "More than functional," Ji-won said grimly. "They're becoming incredibly efficient. Casualty rates are dropping. Mission success rates are climbing. But the long-term psychological cost is going to be severe." Enender, Junho thought about Lieutenant Sarah and her 13% acceptable loss rate. He thought about Corporal Hyun and his empty eyes. He thought about all the young people who had entered this war as civilians and were becoming something else. "What about the psychological warfare reports?" Junho asked. "I heard about an incident at the Battle of Europa." The intelligence officer shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, sir. After the battle, human forces left messages for the Vral. Written in Vral script. The messages described in detail what had been done to their captured soldiers before they died." "We tortured prisoners?" Junho said, his voice sharp. "No, sir," the officer said quickly. "The messages were fabrications. But the Vral don't know that. They believe them. It's caused significant psychological stress in their forces. Some units have refused to engage when they believe human forces might be present." "Who authorized this?" Junho demanded. "No one, sir," the officer said. "It was a field initiative by local commanders. They're calling it force multiplication through fear." Junho sat back in his chair. Humanity was winning, yes, but at what cost? They were learning to fight like monsters to beat monsters, and the Vral were starting to fear them not because humanity was stronger, but because humanity was becoming something the Vral could not understand. That night, Junho stood on the observation deck and looked out at the stars. His reflection in the glass looked back at him. He studied his own eyes and wondered if he was becoming one of the dead-eyed ones too. The war was changing everyone, and Junho was beginning to realize that victory might cost humanity more than defeat ever could. They were learning to win by becoming the thing they feared most. And the worst part was, it was working. The Vral were beginning to break. Not because humanity was defeating them in battle, but because humanity was willing to go places the Vral could not follow. Into darkness, into cold calculation, into a place where victory mattered more than what victory required, and Junho wondered if humanity would ever find its way back. Major Kim Taeyang stood on the ridge and looked down at the Vral city below. 1 year into the war, and humanity was no longer defending. They were attacking. This was the first Vral colony world that human forces had invaded. Take it, hold it, break them. Sir, artillery is in position, his lieutenant said. Ready on your command. Kim raised his binoculars and studied the city. Intelligence said 2 million Vral civilians lived there, along with 50,000 military personnel. The civilians were not his concern. Command had been clear. This was total war now. Fire, Kim said. The artillery opened up. He watched the shells arc through the sky and slam into the city below. Explosions bloomed like flowers. Buildings collapsed. The bombardment would continue for 6 hours. Then his ground forces would move in. Kim felt nothing as he watched. That was new. A year ago, the thought of civilian casualties would have kept him awake at night. Now, it was just numbers on a tactical display. Engineer Ojina made final adjustments to the weapon and stepped back. The device sat on the laboratory table, small and innocent-looking, but Gina knew what it could do, what it was designed to do. Run the test, she told her assistant. They activated the device near a captured Vral test subject. The creature began to scream within seconds. Its 4 arms flailed. Its body convulsed. The device emitted a frequency that affected Vral neural systems specifically. It caused intense pain without physical damage. Duration? Gina asked. Subject has been experiencing pain for 4 minutes, her assistant said. Neural scans show no signs of adaptation or tolerance building. Good, Gina said. Package it for field deployment. Her assistant hesitated. Ma'am, this weapon is designed purely to cause suffering. It has no tactical value beyond psychological warfare. That is its tactical value, Gina said flatly. The Vral need to understand what happens when they fight us. They need to understand that surrender is the only acceptable option. This is torture. Her assistant said quietly. Gina looked at the young engineer. Yes, she said. It is. Do you have a problem with that? The assistant looked away. No, ma'am. Gina went back to her work. She had stopped asking herself moral questions months ago. There was only the mission. Only victory. Everything else was noise. Sergeant Bae Minho walked through the ruins of the Vral city 3 days after the invasion began. The fighting was over. The Vral military had surrendered after realizing that human forces would destroy the entire city rather than accept a stalemate. But what Minho saw in the aftermath made him stop and stare. Human soldiers had rounded up Vral civilians. Thousands of them. They were being processed, documented, and relocated to internment camps. The camps were necessary, Command said. The Vral could not be trusted to remain peaceful. But that was not what made Minho stop. A group of soldiers had found a Vral who had fired on human forces during the battle. He was clearly not military, just a civilian who had tried to defend his home. The soldiers had tied him to a post in the city square. They had activated one of Engineer Gina's pain devices and left him there. The Vral was still screaming. Sergeant, one of the soldiers said when he saw Minho approaching. This one killed Private Lee. We're making an example. Minho looked at the suffering creature. He looked at the soldiers, young men and women who a year ago had been students, workers, ordinary people. Now they stood and watched torture with blank expressions. Turn it off, Minho said. Sir, the soldier said. Turn it off and shoot him, Minho said. We're soldiers, not monsters. Command says we're supposed to, the soldier began. I don't care what command says, Minho said. Turn it off or I will. The soldiers looked at each other, then deactivated the device. One of them shot the Vral. It died instantly, finally free from pain. Sergeant. We were following orders, the soldier said defensively. I know, Minho said quietly. He walked away before they could see his hands shaking. Later, Major Kim gathered his senior staff for a briefing. The invasion had been a success. The Vral colony was under human control. Casualties had been minimal on the human side. We've established a new model for planetary conquest, Kim told his officers. Overwhelming bombardment, followed by rapid ground insertion. The Vral simply cannot match our willingness to accept collateral damage. Sir, Sergeant Bay Minho said. Permission to speak? Granted, Kim said. What we did here was not a military operation, Minho said. It was extermination. We killed thousands of civilians to take one city. The room went silent. Kim looked at Minho with cold eyes. Do you have a point, Sergeant? My point is that we're becoming the thing we're supposed to be fighting against, Minho said. The Vral attacked us. They were wrong. But what we're doing now is not defense. It's revenge. It's victory, Kim said. And victory is all that matters. At what cost? Minho asked. Kim stood up and walked over to Minho. The cost is whatever it needs to be. When the Vral attacked Proxima Station, they killed 50,000 civilians. When they bombed Earth's moon colony, they killed another 200,000. We are doing whatever it takes to make sure they never attack us again. And what happens when the war is over? Minho asked. What happens when we have to look at ourselves and realize what we became? Kim was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Then, we live with it. Because living as monsters is better than dying as heroes. That night, Bay Minho sat in his quarters and wrote in his journal. He had started keeping it 3 months ago, documenting what he saw, what he felt. He needed to remember, needed to have proof that he had once been human. Today I realized something, he wrote. We're winning this war. The Vral are breaking. Their fleets are in retreat. Their colonies are falling. And we're winning because we're willing to do things they won't. We're willing to burn their cities, to kill their civilians, to torture their prisoners. We've become the monsters we needed to be to survive. And that's when the first genuine fear hit me. Not fear of the Vral. Not fear of death. Fear of ourselves. Fear of what we're capable of when we decide that victory justifies anything. The Vral made a terrible mistake when they attacked us. They thought we were weak because we valued life. They didn't understand that people who value life also understand exactly what they're sacrificing when they take it. And that makes us more dangerous than anything in the galaxy. Minho put down his pen and looked at his reflection in the dark window. The man looking back at him had empty eyes, dead eyes. The eyes of someone who had seen too much and felt too little. The Vral were learning to fear humanity. But Minho was learning something worse. He was learning to fear what humanity was becoming. And he knew that fear would never leave him, even if they won the war, maybe especially if they won. President Nam So-young stood before the Council of Earth and held the Vral surrender document in her hands. 18 months of war. And it was finally over. The Vral Collective was offering unconditional surrender. They would accept any terms humanity demanded. But the room was not celebrating. It was arguing. We should reject their surrender. Colonel Shin-wook said firmly. We should finish this. Eliminate their military capability completely. Make sure they can never threaten us again. That would require invading their homeworlds, another council member said. The casualties would be enormous. Acceptable casualties, Shin said. We've come this far. We should finish it. So-young looked at the colonel. He was 45 years old, a career military officer who had lost his family in the Proxima Station attack. Before the war, he had been known for his careful planning and humanitarian concerns. Now, he was advocating for genocide with the same calm tone he might use to discuss weather. "Colonel," So-young said, "do you understand what you're proposing? You're talking about killing billions of Vral. I'm talking about ensuring human survival," Shin said. "They attacked us once. If we show weakness now, they'll attack us again. Or someone else will. We need to send a message to the entire galaxy. Attacking humanity means extinction. We've already sent that message," So-young said. "They're surrendering. They're terrified of us." "Good," Shin said. "Let's make sure they stay terrified." Dr. An Ji-won reviewed the psychological profiles and felt sick. She had been documenting the mental state of returning soldiers for 6 months now. And the patterns were clear. Humanity had won the war, but at a cost that went far beyond the casualty numbers. "Major, can you tell me about your dreams?" she asked the soldier sitting across from her. Major Park Dong-hyun looked at her with flat eyes. "I don't dream anymore." "Doctor, you must dream," Ji-won said gently. "Everyone dreams." "Then, I don't remember them," Dong-hyun said. "I sleep. I wake up. That's all." "Do you feel anything when you think about the war?" Ji-won asked. "No," Dong-hyun said simply. "Nothing at all?" Ji-won pressed. "Not guilt, not pride, not relief that it's over? Nothing." Dong-hyun repeated. "I did what needed to be done. Now it's done. That's all there is." After the session, Ji-won added his profile to the others. 83% of combat veterans showed signs of severe emotional trauma. 62% had completely flat affect, showing no emotional response to any stimulus. 47% reported suicidal thoughts. And these were the winners. These were the people who had saved humanity. Ji-won had written a report for the council. In it, she warned that humanity was facing a psychological crisis that could last generations. The soldiers who had fought this war had sacrificed more than their bodies. They had sacrificed their humanity itself. She wondered if anyone would listen. Private Han Suji walked through her childhood home and felt like a stranger. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, the smell of her mother's cooking. But none of it felt real. "Suji, dinner is ready," her mother called. Suji sat at the table with her family. Her mother and father smiled at her. Her younger brother asked her questions about space, about aliens, about the war. She answered mechanically, telling him nothing real. "We're so proud of you," her father said. "You're a hero." Hero. That word felt like a knife in her chest. Suji thought about Corporal Jung dying in her arms. She thought about the Vral she had killed, some of them probably just defending their homes like she had defended hers. She thought about the empty feeling inside her that never went away. "I'm not a hero," Suji said quietly. "Of course you are," her mother said. "You fought for Earth. You protected us." "I killed people," Suji said. "A lot of people. Some of them were probably innocent. Some of them were probably just scared, like I was scared. But I killed them anyway because that's what war is. And now I can't feel anything about it. I can't feel anything about anything." Her family was silent. Her little brother looked confused. Her mother had tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Suji said. "I shouldn't have said that. Excuse me." She left the table and went to her old room. She sat on her childhood bed and looked at the posters on the walls, the books on the shelves, the stuffed animals she had loved as a child. She tried to remember what it felt like to be that girl. She couldn't. The Council of Earth met in emergency session. The debate over the Vral surrender terms had been going on for 3 days. President So-young was exhausted, but she could not show weakness now. "We have 3 proposals on the table," she said. Colonel Shin's proposal for continued military action until complete Vral disarmament. Admiral Park's proposal for harsh surrender terms, including reparations and military restrictions. And Ambassador Lee's proposal for negotiated peace with moderate terms. "The moderate terms are weakness," Shin said. The Vral will see it as an invitation to attack again. The harsh terms will breed resentment, Ambassador Lee argued. We'll be creating the conditions for another war in 20 years. And your proposal for genocide? So-young asked Shin directly. What will that breed? Peace, Shin said. Real, lasting peace. At the cost of our souls, So-young said. Colonel, I understand your anger. We all lost people in this war, but if we continue fighting now, if we slaughter the Vral after they've surrendered, we become the aggressors. We become the thing we fought against. Better to be alive and guilty than dead and innocent, Shin said. The room erupted in arguments. So-young let it go on for several minutes, then called for order. We will vote, she said, not on whether to accept surrender. That decision is made. We will vote on the terms. The vote was close. But in the end, the harsh terms won. The Vral would surrender unconditionally. They would pay massive reparations. Their military would be limited to defensive forces only. Human observers would monitor their compliance for the next 50 years. It was not genocide. But it was crushing. It was designed to break the Vral so completely that they would never threaten humanity again. And it worked. The Vral accepted every term without argument, not because the terms were fair, but because they were terrified of what would happen if they refused. That night, former Captain Lee Dae-ho, now Admiral Lee Dae-ho, stood in the memorial garden on Earth. The names of the dead were carved into black stone walls that stretched for half a kilometer. 53,000 names, 53,000 people who had died in 18 months of war. Admiral, a voice said. Sergeant Bae Minho approached and saluted. At ease, Sergeant, Dae-ho said. You don't have to salute me here. They stood together in silence, reading the names. Do you think it was worth it? Minho asked. I don't know, Dae-ho said honestly. We survived. We won. But I look at what we became, and I wonder if the price was too high. I've been writing about the war, Minho said. Documenting what we did. What we became. I want people to know. I want them to understand the real cost. What will you call it? Dae-ho asked. Minho was quiet for a moment. And the second genuine fear hit me, he said finally. The second fear? Dae-ho asked. The first fear was what we felt in battle, Minho explained. Fear of death, fear of the enemy, fear of losing. That fear made us fight harder, made us do impossible things. That fear saved us. And the second fear? The second fear came later, Minho said. When we realized what we had become to survive, when we looked at ourselves and saw monsters looking back, the fear of what we're capable of, the fear that maybe the Vral were right to be afraid of us. That fear is worse than anything the war threw at us. Dae-ho nodded slowly. And that fear will never leave us, he said. No, Minho agreed. It won't. But maybe it shouldn't. Maybe we need to remember both fears. The fear that saved us, and the fear of ourselves that should guide us forward. The war was over. Humanity had won. But victory felt hollow. And every soldier who came home carried the same weight, the knowledge of what they had done, what they had become, and the fear that it could happen again, 5 years after the war ended. Admiral Lee Dae-ho stood at the podium in the United Earth Council chamber and looked out at the assembled representatives. Behind him, the flags of Earth's nations hung alongside the banners of 3 alien species. New allies, new trading partners, new civilizations that had approached humanity with extreme caution and even more extreme politeness. Everyone was afraid of humans now. Thank you for this honor, Dae-ho said, accepting the medal that marked him as one of Earth's greatest heroes. The ceremony was broadcast across the entire planet and to human colonies throughout the system. But I want to be clear about something. This medal does not celebrate what I did during the war. It remembers the cost of what we all did. Every person who fought in that war paid a price. Some paid with their lives. Others paid with pieces of their souls. The chamber was silent. This was not the speech anyone had expected. 5 years ago, we won a war, Deho continued. We proved that humanity could not be conquered. We showed the galaxy what we're capable of when threatened. But we also learned something about ourselves that we can never unlearn. We learned that when survival is at stake, there is no line we won't cross. No price we won't pay. And that knowledge will haunt us forever. In the audience, several council members shifted uncomfortably. This was supposed to be a celebration, not a confession. But Deho was not finished. The Vral attacked us because they misunderstood us. They thought we were weak. They learned we were not. But in teaching them that lesson, we became something that frightens not just them, but ourselves. And I believe that fear, that self-awareness, is the most important thing we gained from the war. Because if we ever forget what we're capable of, we might become the very thing we fought against. Sergeant Bei Minho, now a civilian, sat in a small bookstore and signed copies of his memoir. The title was printed in simple letters on the cover, and the second genuine fear hit me: A Soldier's Account of the Vral War. The book had been controversial. Some praised it for its honesty. Others condemned it as unpatriotic. The government had tried to discourage its publication, but Minho had refused to back down. The story needed to be told. Can you explain the title? A young woman asked as he signed her copy. Minho looked up at her. She was maybe 20 years old. She would have been 15 when the war ended. Too young to have fought, but old enough to remember. During the war, we felt fear all the time, Minho said. Fear of dying. Fear of losing. That was the first fear. It pushed us to fight harder, to be stronger, to do whatever it took to survive. And the second fear? She asked. The second fear came when we realized what we had done to survive, Minho said. When we looked at the things we were capable of, and understood that we could become monsters if we decided it was necessary. That fear is different. It doesn't make you fight harder. It makes you question whether winning was worth the cost. The young woman was quiet for a moment. Do you think it was worth it? She asked. Yes, Minho said without hesitation. But that doesn't mean I'm proud of everything we did. It means I understand that sometimes survival requires you to make choices you'll regret for the rest of your life. The important thing is to remember those choices. To carry that weight, because the moment we forget what we're capable of is the moment we might do it again. Lieutenant Park Yuna walked through the training facility and watched the new recruits practice. She had never seen combat. She had graduated from the academy 2 years after the war ended, but she had studied it extensively. She knew what her predecessors had done, what they had become, and she was determined that her generation would be different. Lieutenant, one of the recruits said after the exercise ended, can I ask you something? Of course, Yuna said. They say the war changed people, the recruit said. That the soldiers who fought came back different. Empty. But you're teaching us to be soldiers. How do we avoid becoming like them? Yuna considered the question carefully. You don't avoid it, she said finally. War changes everyone. Combat changes you in ways you can't predict or control. But what you can control is how you prepare for it. You can go into war with your eyes open, understanding what you might have to do and what it might cost. That's what the previous generation didn't have. They were thrown into war unprepared. We have the chance to do better. How? The recruit asked. By remembering their lessons, Yuna said. By understanding that being strong doesn't mean being cruel. That victory doesn't justify everything. That the real test of a soldier is not whether they can kill, but whether they can choose not to kill when they have the power to do so. The recruit nodded slowly. Do you think there will be another war? He asked. Maybe, Yuna said. The galaxy is a big place, but if there is, we'll face it differently than our predecessors did. The Vral ambassador Thelmara stood in the human embassy and looked at the Earth diplomat across from her. 5 years of peace had not made these meetings less uncomfortable. The Vral still feared humans. They probably always would. Ambassador, the human diplomat said. The trade agreement is ready for final signatures. Thank you, Thelmara said. Her translator converted her clicks and whistles into human language. May I speak frankly? Of course, the diplomat said. My people made a terrible mistake when we attacked yours, Thelmara said. We thought you were weak. We thought you valued individual life so much that you would surrender rather than fight. We did not understand that people who value life also understand its cost. That makes you more dangerous than any species we have ever encountered. The diplomat was quiet for a moment. Are you afraid of us? She asked. Yes, Thelmara said honestly. Every species in the galaxy is afraid of you now. Hope? The diplomat asked. A species that fears its own power is less likely to misuse it. Thelmara explained. You could have destroyed us completely. You had the power. But you chose not to. Not because you were weak, but because you understood what that choice would make you. That restraint, that self-awareness, is why I believe we can have peace. But you still fear us, the diplomat said. Yes, Thelmara said. And I think we always will. But fear can coexist with respect, with cooperation, with peace. The war taught both our species painful lessons. Perhaps we can learn from them together. Admiral Lee Daeho stood before the council one final time. He was retiring, returning to private life. But before he left, he had requested permission to address the assembly. Members of the council, he said, I have spent 5 years thinking about the war, about what we did, about what we became, and I want to leave you with a warning. The chamber waited in silence. Humanity won the war because we were willing to become monsters, Daeho said. We crossed every line. We sacrificed our principles for victory. And it worked. The Vral surrendered. Other species treat us with fear and respect. We are safe. He paused, letting his words sink in. But that success is also our greatest danger, he continued. Because now we know it works. We know that if we're willing to set aside our morality, if we're willing to do whatever it takes, we can win. That knowledge is a poison. It will tempt us every time we face a challenge, every time we encounter resistance, and if we give in to that temptation too easily, we will become the thing we fought against. What are you suggesting, Admiral? A council member asked. I'm suggesting we remember both fears, Daeho said. The first fear, the fear of death and defeat, taught us how to fight. The second fear, the fear of what we became, taught us why we should avoid fighting if we can. We need both. The strength to fight when we must, and the wisdom to know when we must not. And if we face another threat? Another council member asked. Another species that attacks us? Then we defend ourselves, Daeho said. But we do it as the people we want to be, not the people we were forced to become. We do it, remembering the cost. We do it understanding that every life we take, every line we cross, every principle we abandon, is a wound that may never heal. We do it knowing that victory is not worth losing ourselves completely. He looked around the chamber at the faces of the people who would guide humanity's future. The war is over, Daeho said. But the real battle is just beginning. The battle to remain human while having the power to be something else. That's the battle we must never lose. Because if we do, then the Vral were right to be afraid of us. And we would be right to fear ourselves. Later, Daeho met with Private Han Suji, now a civilian working as a counselor for veterans. They sat in a quiet cafe and talked about the future. Do you think we can heal? Suji asked. Some wounds never fully heal, Daeho said. But they can become scars. Reminders of what we survived. What we learned. I'm still numb most of the time, Suji admitted. I can't feel joy or sadness the way I used to. It's like that part of me died in the war, but you're trying, Deho said. You're helping others. That matters. Does it? Suji asked. Sometimes I think we're all just pretending to be human again. Going through the motions. Maybe, Deho said. But maybe that's how healing starts. You pretend until one day you realize you're not pretending anymore. You're living. Really. Living. Suji was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised them both. I felt something yesterday. For the first time in years, I was working with a veteran, and he told me my advice helped him. And for just a moment, I felt happy. Really happy. It was like a spark of the person I used to be. Deho smiled. Then there's hope, he said. For you, for all of us. They sat in comfortable silence, two survivors of humanity's greatest test. Learning how to be human again, in the peace they had bought, with their souls. The war was over. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity. But more importantly, humanity had learned to fear itself. And in that fear, in that self-awareness, lay the seed of something better. A future where strength was tempered by wisdom. Where power was guided by conscience. Where humanity could be both strong enough to survive and good enough to be worth surviving. It would not be easy. The scars would never fully fade. But they would try. They would remember both fears. And they would build a future worthy of the price they had paid.